Okay, I did. Okay. Um, Good evening to all of you. I see that we are more than 40 people. That's great. Let's start. Well, welcome to this conference entitled Japan EU Common Interests for a Strategic Partnership. My name is Romain Gossin. I am a member of the Student Association Global Initiative, which aims to promote international relations within the UCLeuven campus through articles, conferences, and recently podcasts. Tonight, we are honored to welcome His Excellency the Ambassador Masaki of the Mission of Japan to the European Union. Your Excellency, thank you for your valuable time tonight. This is an honor to have you with us. The conference will be moderated by Professor Dr. Elena Atanasova-Cornelis from UC Leuven and the University of Antwerp. Professor, thank you for being here and thank you for making this conference possible. Just before kicking off the conference and hand over to Mrs. Atanasova-Cornelis, I would like to give a special thanks to Anthony Ricotta, whom dedicated so much energy in the good organization of this conference. So thank you very much, Anthony. Let's not wait anymore. I think I have said it all. So on behalf of the whole Global Initiative Association, we wish you a very good conference. Professor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Romain. Ambassador Masaki, also on behalf of all our students at UCLeuven, at Antwerp, and from myself, thank you very much for your time and for your willingness to engage with our students on the topic of Japan-EU relations. On this very cold and cloudy evening, I'm sure that this will be a fantastic event that will keep everyone focused and enjoy very much this very special evening. I would like to present you to our audience, and I would like to start by mentioning that you have an impressive career of 37 years at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and counting. You joined the ministry back in 1984. You served in Embassy of Japan in France and Iran and in a number of posts at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For the information of our audience, Ambassador Masaki was the director at the WTO Dispute Settlement Division Economic Affairs Bureau of the Ministry. He was also counselor at the Cabinet Secretariat of the Government of Japan, director of the Economic and Social Treaties Division at the International Legal Affairs Bureau at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, director of the International Legal Affairs Division at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, director of the Overseas Establishments Division at Foreign Ministry's Secretariat. He was also a minister at the Embassy of Japan in France, Deputy Director General at the Economic Affairs Bureau of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Assistant Vice Minister in charge of relations with the Parliament, Assistant Minister and the Director General at the European Affairs Bureau at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, and since July 2020, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Japan to the European Union. So thank you again, Ambassador, for your time. I'm sure that our audience is very much looking forward to hearing your views on Japan's relations with the European Union. Of course, Japan is very far away from Europe, geographically very, very distant, but there's very important shared values and convergent interests, in particular strategic interests, which actually bring Japan very close to us in Europe. So without further delay, I would like to give the floor to you. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Professor. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for organizing this conference. First, I'd like to tell you I'm very impressed by this poster, beautifully with a photo. And I don't know how many people already visited Japan. This seems to me a very nice noodle shop, which is called ramen. It reminds me of my nostalgia to the Japanese cuisine, but it will not hinder me from giving a lecture tonight. So thank you very much. I'm very honored to be invited to give a lecture today in this very famous university, Leuven Catholic in Belgium. And I'd like to once more thank you for Professor Atanasoba and all the students who organized this global initiative. And I'm also very glad to see so many people coming to hear my lecture on Japan here at the University Catholic Leuven, with thanking to the new technologies of digital ones. And today, I'd like to speak about the relations between Japan and the EU, which I'm now in charge of as Ambassador of Japan to the European Union. The EU is one of the most important partners with whom Japan promotes universal values such as freedom, democracy, multilateralism, human rights, and the rule of law. In the last century, the international community experienced two world wars that shaped the current international order into one, which seeks to champion and promote world peace and stability. However, over the 20 years that have passed since the beginning of the 21st century, we have to admit that the order is now being challenged. Under these circumstances, there is an increasing need for cooperation between Japan and the EU, which share common values. Japan and the EU are like-minded partners that are seeking to contribute to improving the rule-based order for the international community and also address various global issues. Japan would like to work together on pressing issues with the EU to make the world more peaceful and prosperous based on these common values. Why is EU-Japan cooperation needed today? What is Europe for Japan? And what is Japan for Europe? Famous historian Edward Hallett Carr said, "History is an ending dialogue between the present and the past." The end of quotations. Bearing this phrase in mind in today's lecture, I would first like to give an overview of the history of the exchanges and encounters between Japan and Europe until the present. In the second half, I would like to find the answer to the dialogue between the present and the past as to why Japan and the EU need to cooperate in the turbulent times of today. Do you know how many years ago Japanese and the Europeans first encountered one another? The first clear answer goes back about 500 years. Europe in the 16th century was in the age of discovery. It was an era of Spanish and Portuguese hegemony. The Mediterranean was also greatly influenced by the Ottoman Empire at this time. It was a time when Spain and Portugal promoted their missions of Christianity, trade, and colonizations all over the world. It was in this era, in 1543, that Portuguese missionaries and merchants first arrived in Japan, according to the history. At that time, Japan was in the warring states period when the daimyo, a kind of feudal lords, were fighting for hegemony. So the newly incoming guns and ammunition from Europe spread like wildfire. At the same time, certain popular foods and sweets, such as tempura and castella, as you see that, maybe certain of you have already tasted, were introduced at this time too. The recipe and the names of these widely enjoyed foods in Japan have Portuguese origins. Some Japanese became Christians, and in 1582, 4 Japanese boys visited Rome as recommendations of the Jesuit. So cultural and diplomatic exchanges have long characterized our relation with Europe. However, in the 17th century, Japan's Edo shogunate decided to limit trade with Europe only through designated towns until the end of the Edo period in 1868. With these decisions, for about 200 years, from the mid-17th century until Japan reopened its borders in the late 19th century. The only nation trading with Japan in Europe was the Netherlands, as the Dutch had little interest in missionary work. Then, in the 19th century, the international community was flooded with waves of colonizations by the great powers. Japan, which had closed its borders to foreign countries, except the Netherlands, was forced by the United States to open its country and sign a Nicole Treaty. Some groups in Japan opposed this, and there were movements to overturn the Edo shogunate, which led to the domestic upheaval in Japan that took on the appearance of a civil war. France and the United Kingdom supported rival groups in Japan during this turmoil. In 1868, the turmoil in Japan was over, and it was decided to once again open the borders to the international community. It was the end of the Edo period and the birth of modern Japan. The first thing that the Japanese government implemented upon reopening the borders in the 19th century was modernization policy under the slogans of Fukoku Kyohei, which means enrich the country, strengthen the force, and encouragement of new industry, and out of Asia and into Europe, slogan calling for Japan to align itself with the West, the government attempted new policies. Japan undertook various reforms and created a national system that followed the European system. The constitutional monarchy was introduced from the United Kingdom, the constitutions from Prussia, the criminal and civil law codes from France, the army from France and later also from Prussia, and navy from the United Kingdom, and so on. Even in the architectures and science, we imported styles and systems from Europe at that time. In terms of life and culture, Japanese people have been greatly influenced by Europe. European culture has come to influence or inspire every part of our lives, including clothing, food, drinks, and literature. And I am sure that you can identify ways in which Japanese culture has permitted and left its own marks on Europe and the West, as seen in the example of Japonism, which was popular in Western art in the latter half of the 19th century. However, once the modernization policy was rapidly implemented, this led to Japan participating in many wars in the international community quickly after that. Among them was 1894-1895 Sino-Japanese War, the 1902 Anglo-Japanese Alliance, the 1900-1905 Russo-Japanese War, and World War I, during which Japan dispatched its navy to Europe. In 1920, the League of Nations was established. Japan expanded its influence in Asia and further strengthened its military power after the First World War. Japan withdrew from the League of Nations in 1933 and entered World War II in 1939 to 1945 on the side of the Axis powers and lost in 1945. It was just after the United States dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In short, as soon as Japan opened its borders to the international community in the latter half of the 19th century, it promoted modernization policies and strengthened its military power. Nevertheless, Japan was defeated and lost so much in World War II. After the war, and stemming from a deep remorse, Japan made its pledge to never wage a war again and pursue peace. This pledge, never to wage a war again and pledge for peace, is also written in the preamble of the constitutions of Japan. Proactive contribution to peace based on the principle of international cooperation is the basis of post-war Japanese diplomacy, motivated by the experience of World War II and the deep reflections afterwards. The situation was also devastating here in Europe, as you all know. Similarly, in light of the lessons of the war, Europeans sought regional integrations. The European Coal and Steel Community (ECSC) was established, and the European Economic Community (EEC) and the European Atomic Energy Community (Euratom) merged to form the European Community (EC) in 1966. At this point, Japan-Europe relations were mainly focused on economy and trade. The permanent mission of Japan to the EC, the EU, where I work, was also established in 1974. At that time, resolving trade conflicts was a major task. After that, the relationship between Japan and Europe changed drastically and gained momentum with the expansions of EC authority and the deepening of integrations. In 1993, the Maastricht Treaty created the EU. Japan and the EU have deepened their relationship since not only in economy and trade, but also in a wide range of fields, such as politics and science and technology. Having given an overview of the historical dimensions of EU-Japan relations, I will talk about the present and the future. After the Second World War, we established an international order which has supported world peace and stability. But now we face new great challenges. The international situation is becoming more uncertain. Some argue that the US-China conflict reflects the greater ideological conflict between liberal democracy and authoritarianism. Japan is a resource-poor island nation and maintains relationship with neighboring countries, including China and Russia. When it comes to relation with China, the peaceful development of China should be welcomed by both Japan and the international community. However, in the East China Sea and the South China Sea, the unilateral attempts to change the status quo continue. Japan is seriously concerned with the situations. The situation in North Korea, which faces nuclear development, missiles, and abductions issues, is also serious. Against these backdrops, it is quite natural for Japan to deepen its cooperation with like-minded countries and regions like the EU that share fundamental values. Japan and the EU are geographically distant. However, over time, Japan, like the EU, has made a pledge to pursue and promote peace and fundamental values such as pacifism, freedom, human rights, and democracy. Even if you look around the world, such like-mindedness countries are variable. Among the international community, both Japan and the EU need to disseminate these fundamental values and promote the creations of new rules and regulations for peace and stability of the international community. The Japan-EU Economic Partnership Agreement and the Strategic Partnership Agreement already exist as the foundations for cooperation between Japan and the EU. As you may know, the EPA is an agreement on trade between just Japan and the EU, but its scale should not be underestimated as it is the world's largest free economic zone, accounting for about 30% of world GDP and about 40% of world trade. The SPA, agreed in 2018, also promotes cooperation between Japan, the EU, and EU member states in a wide range of areas of common concern, including global priorities and challenges such as non-proliferations, counter-terrorism, humanitarian aid, and climate change. It also governs and seeks to strengthen mutually strategic partnership in the future. It is a confirmation that we will continue enhancing our engagement, and it will be the legal basis for further cooperation between Japan and the EU. To put it plainly, it is proof of the determinations that Japan and the EU have to work together to address the challenges of the international community. What are some of the urgent issues facing the international community that Japan and the EU should address together? Well, as I mentioned earlier, from a security perspective, some countries are currently continuing and intensifying their unilateral attempts to change the status quo in the Indo-Pacific regions without a basis in international law. On the other hand, Japan is making efforts to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific regions for all countries based on the very principle of international law. The government of Japan has advocated this vision in its Free and Open Indo-Pacific, FOIP for short. In line with Japan's visions, the European Council has also very recently formulated the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Again, the partnership between Japan and the EU is based on concrete cooperations. For example, in mid-May, Japan is planning a joint military drill with France and the United States. Japan has also contributed to the EU's NAVFOR Atlanta operation to counter piracy in the Indian Ocean. Therefore, cooperation on security issues, including such joint port calls, have been progressing steadily. All of these are the results of an approach dedicated to deepening collaborations under the common values of human rights and the rule of law. Just as the EU cooperates on the issues surrounding Japan in the Indo-Pacific regions, far from the EU's own shores, Japan also cooperates on issues closer to home for the EU, for example, on Ukraine, the Middle East, the Western Balkans, and Africa. Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific is actually not just about the Asian regions. As you can see from this map, this is map of connectivity. It extends to the West Balkans and the African region. Japan has also signed the partnership on sustainable connectivity and quality infrastructure between Japan and the European Union with the EU aimed at strengthening connectivity. Specifically, some of Japan's ODA projects are presented as Japan-EU synergies and are complementary with regards to sustainable connectivity and quality infrastructures. For example, both Japan and the EU support border management between Afghanistan and Tajikistan. At a border crossing point, the facilities are funded by the EU on the Afghan side and by Japan on the Tajik side. Another example is in Africa, where both Japan and the EU support the road constructions of the Nakala corridor in Southeast Africa. The rehabilitations of the Nampula-Kwamba road in Mozambique is also co-financed by Japan and the EU. As you can see from these cases, Japan and the EU are no longer in that distant relationship that began nearly 500 years ago. Globalization has shortened the distance and made relations more dynamic and multifaceted. In addition, it can be said that it is rare for two such distant actors in the world to hold a relationship based on the same values today, despite 500 years of very distinct histories. In the future, Japan and the EU will continue to work together to contribute to the creations of frameworks for the international community that will allow it to respond better to global challenges such as climate change, digital reforms, and security. We would like to make the international community more peaceful, stable, and sustainable through working with the European people as we build on our 500-year history of exchanges. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm very glad to be able to answer all your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Masaki. Thank you so much first for following and adhering to the tight schedule of your presentation. I really appreciate it very much. And thank you so much for the insightful presentation, especially for bringing history into the dimension of contemporary international relations. It is really this gives you a spectacular or very special feeling knowing that our contacts between Europe and Japan stretch back 500 years ago. And then you have provided such a nice overview from the early encounters and then the period of Japan's modernization, the influence of Europe on Japan, and of course the developments in the 19th, 20th century, the devastation of the wars, and then the recovery in both Japan and Europe. And then in the post-Cold War years, in the 1990s, 2000s, until the present day, the strengthening and building of Japan-EU relations, which of course, as you pointed out, one of the culminations was the signing of the Economic Partnership Agreement and the SPA Strategic Partnership Agreement back in 2018. I would like, we have already a number of questions for you, but if I may sort of kick off the debate and a little bit abuse my sort of role as a moderator with one question that I would like very much to ask based on your presentation. You have mentioned in your presentation in the last part, focusing on the contemporary or current relations between Japan and Europe, you made a reference to China, that Japan welcomes China and the peaceful development of China, but also you made references to concerns in the East and South China Sea that Japan and other actors play. You also made references to Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision, to Japan's efforts at realizing free and open Indo-Pacific region for all countries, in particular with emphasis, as you pointed out, to adherence to international law. I would like to ask, from Japan's perspective, and perhaps if you look also at China's Belt and Road initiatives and China's foreign policy objectives under Xi Jinping, Where does China, what is the place of China perhaps in Japanese conception of the free and open Indo-Pacific? Is there a place for China, or does Japan envisage that region in some sort of a different way by perhaps cooperating with China maybe on some specific issues, or perhaps within framework of coalitions or on a bilateral basis? So how do you see Japan's relations with China in the framework of the Indo-Pacific vision?
Thank you very much for your first questions, Mrs. Professor. I think that's a very pertinent questions. First, I'd like to explain a little more our visions of free and open Indo-Pacific. There are some in Europe too to criticize this vision, like a NATO, Asian version of NATO, or the military alliance against one country, notably China or even Russia. But it's not true. As I explained to you clearly, it's not an initiative to exclude any country. What we want to emphasize in this initiative is the area of Indo-Pacific should be open, transparent, sustainable, based on the international rule. And China or any other country will be welcome to join that. And I talked about our cooperations on connectivity, EU and Japan. Everybody knows there are other initiatives, such as One Belt and One Road by China, or Russian initiative, especially in the continent Eurasia. And we don't have any opposition to any other initiative. But I think all the countries which are going to having a benefit from those initiatives should have that based on the sustainabilities or the global standards. Unfortunately, there are some countries who received the money from those countries not based on the transparency or sustainability, and they're suffering very much now because they can't reimburse the debts which they received. That's not the interest, not only to those countries, but also to the world. So we should have really cooperation to make infrastructure projects which will be beneficial, sustainable, and open to every country. So China is having such a kind of project. Why not having cooperation together? As all of you know that I explained in my presentation, China is one of the most important neighbor country to us. I didn't explain in detail the history of a country with China. We are always influenced very much by China during a long history. We don't have any interest to contain China or to see the stability of China. We should have a very stable, constructive relation with China. So all our initiative, we call HOIP, or the connectivity, not having any purpose to exclude any country, neither Russia, neither China. But the most important thing is we have to respect the international law. We can't allow any country to change the status quo by use of force. Look at the Ukraine. So we are against the Russians' interventions to have taken illegally the Crimea, and also to the eastern part of Ukraine. We ask every party to implement the agreement, which is called Minsk Agreement. So the same thing could be said to the Asian situations. Every country should respect the international law, and we will never allow any country to change the status quo by use of force with violating the international law. Thank you.
Thank you very much for clarifying Japanese vision on free and open Indo-Pacific. I think it's very important for our audience because indeed, as you rightly pointed out, Ambassador, there have been perhaps some commentaries or observers who have looked at free and open Indo-Pacific as exclusive or some sort of new kind of anti-China bloc. But as you point out, this is not indeed the objective, that it is open for all countries that are committed to maintaining and supporting the rule-based order, including China, as you point out, being Japan's indeed one of the most important neighbors. I would like now, Anthony, please, or Roman, to look at the questions that we have from the audience and perhaps combine some of these for the ambassador.
Yes, we have some interesting questions. So the first that I want to ask you is the following. What is the role of the EU-Japan partnership in the fight against global warming?
Okay, so it's a climate change issue is one of the very important issue which we are working every day with the EU. Now we have the same objective on the deadline of 2050, the carbon neutral, climate neutral on that date. And how we can arrive at that? That's the problem, not only to the EU, but also to every country, including Japan. And now we have discussed recently our objective on the 2030, and we expressed our objective by reducing 46% of gases on the year of 2030. And this is not so easy. And in order to realize that objective, like the EU, every country has to make efforts to use sustainable energy, to make a new technology by using for example, hydrogen resources and so on. And in this context, we have a lot of areas to cooperate between the EU and Japan. When I say the cooperation, it's not only at the level of governments, at the level of private sectors. You can very well see already many Japanese companies are very active here in Europe, in many countries, including Belgium, to participate or to work with European countries to develop sustainable energy, such as power plants, wind power plants. And the same thing could be said to the activities in Japan. We are welcoming the European companies to cooperate with the Japanese companies in Japan. Maybe one of the Japanese characteristics is we don't have exactly the same surroundings from the natural point of views. So difficult to realize to the same degree, for example, using sustainable energy such as wind power and so on. And also we have suffered the earthquakes and also the accident of nuclear plants. So the situations of energy supply is different from Europe. But in spite of that, we have interest to cooperate more with the EU on this issue of greens and climate change. So that's one of the most important mission for me to work as ambassador here, to work with the EU. Thank you.
Thank you for this answer. Maybe I can ask another question coming from the audience. Okay, so we have another interesting question. This question is the following. So we know that Shinzo Abe recently stepped down from his PM position. With the arrival of PM Tsuga, what can we expect vis-à-vis the Japanese-EU relationship? And should we expect a certain continuity or a turning point?
Of course, we continue. There's no change of the policy of our government, especially vis-à-vis EU. And Mr. Suga, our Prime Minister, has already had a contact with leaders of the EU, such as Mr. Michel and Mrs. von der Leyen. For example, last year, we have had a very good telephone meetings virtually between our Prime Minister Suga and two presidents of the EU. And at the ministers level, in January, our Foreign Minister Motegi, maybe you saw the photo earlier, he was the first Foreign Minister of Japan to have participated in the Foreign Affairs Council of the EU to discuss free and open Indo-Pacific policies and other issues. And now we are preparing the regular summit between the EU and Japan. Normally we can hold that once a year, but because of COVID, that has been suspended. But certainly before summer, we will do that. So that will show very well the continuity of relation with the EU. It's natural if you understand our history, which I explained to you, both poles, EU and Japan, has a huge interest in continuing and developing the relation between us.
Thank you for your answer.
Okay, I can also pick up some of the questions or combine on Japan-EU relations, combine two questions into one. Ambassador, in your view, what are the key areas between Japan and the European Union that provide the most opportunities for cooperation? And also, what are the key challenges that Japan and EU are facing with regard to maintaining this strong strategic partnership? In other words, the key areas, the opportunities, and the challenges for the partnership.
Thank you for that question. I think the challenges and opportunities are closely linked. Maybe if you see one side, that will be challenges. If you look at the other side, that will be opportunity. I think we are facing in a very difficult period now concerning the multilateral system. There are some big countries which are challenging the multilateral system, such as the United Nations or WTO, whatever. And the EU and Japan has been major players who has established the system and who has benefit from that. And all other countries too. If we allow really the collapse of a multilateral system, that will never be beneficial, not only to the EU, not only to Japan, and not to every country. This is a challenge, but this is also an opportunity for EU and Japan to adapt those existing multilateral system to the new needs or the new era. Take the example of COVID. It's a very big challenge, danger to the world, but also it can be opportunity. How we can change the role of WHO, for example, or how we can change our society, adapt it to the after COVID. One example is digital technology. And one of the top areas of cooperation between Japan and the EU is digital transformations. That has been discussed before COVID, but with COVID, like today, everybody understands the importance of the use of this digital technology. But in society, in the industries, we still have many spaces to improve the use of digital technology. That's a challenge to Japan and also to the EU. And how we can make use of these challenges to have a cooperations to make it an opportunity to the future of our societies. So, for example, I think there are so many areas. So, if I can answer your questions you formulated, challenges or most important challenges is against the international order based on the multilateral system after the war. And how we can tackle those issues, that is the most important challenge. And also global issues such as climate change, environments, and so on. And all those things also will be the opportunities. So in conclusions, I think it's two sides of one coin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very nice reference to the duality of challenges and opportunities concerning the threats that actually we are facing in the 21st century that are quite different, non-traditional security threats, so to speak, than, of course, the traditional security threats that, by the way, of course, as you pointed out, the region is also continuing to face. And in that regard, also, I would like to ask one question and then hand over to Anthony to look at some of the questions. Ambassador, you mentioned, you underlined also in your presentation and in your responses to the questions, the importance of the adherence to the rule of law and to the rules-based international order, which Japan with the European Union together are cooperating in order to maintain and support. And we have a question asking about the in what way does Japan expect the European Union to contribute, for example, to situations where Japan perceives the rule of law to be compromised. There is a reference in the question, for example, to the South China Sea, where in the question is pointed out some countries seem to be disregarding the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. In other words, how, from Japan's perspective, the European Union can be helpful in addressing these issues related to the perceived disregard of the rule of law?
Again, this is a very difficult question to answer. And if I take the example, you have taken that example of the rule of the sea of UN, it's clear that in the ages, certain countries have not respected the UN law of the sea. How we can ask them to implement that? International community doesn't have forces to implement the international law. That's the destiny of international law. But what we can do is we should really raise our voices to the world that every country should respect the rule of law and should respect the system, like the Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. And we have just discussed the area of the maritime areas, but the same thing could be said to other soft areas, such as economic areas. We have a WTO. We have any other tools, international conventions on every areas. Take the example of the intellectual property. We have international conventions which forcing every country to respect the protections of the intellectual property. Certain country couldn't implement or intentionally don't respect that. In that case, we should really make use of all the existing mechanisms to impose the commitments. We should ask them to satisfy all their commitments. What we are now facing, the challenge, for example, in the international organizations such as the WTO, is exactly that. United States, with President Trump, was not happy to see the WTO has imposed their conclusions to the United States, because that will be taking the benefit of US even if they have violated the certain requirement by WTO. But we can't allow that. Every country has to respect the rule which they are committed. So I think the EU and Japan could really encourage them to respect that. If we need the reform of the system, which will be better adapted to the actual era, why not? So that's why we are working, the EU and Japan, very intensively to discuss the reform of WTO. And as I mentioned, the WHO will be the same. What's happened to the WHO during this crisis of COVID? There are many points we have to review that. But that will not say we can really kick out all those existing international organizations, because we have a huge benefit of having that international organizations. And that is something which only the EU and Japan could play a very decisive role to convince the other countries to come to the same road.
Okay, thank you for your answer. So we have here an interesting question on the possibility of this partnership to become a multilateral one. The question is the following: is there room for other states in this partnership? Could it be possible, for example, to include other states? In that case, that would become a multilateral partnership. Do you think it is possible?
I think so. And the EU and Japan only two couldn't really change the existing system for the benefit of the world. And we have to really encourage like-minded countries to join us. Let's take the example of the maritime areas issues in the Indo-Pacific. We have like-minded partners in that regions, such as the United States or Australia and India and South Korea. And that can be joined by other like-minded countries, including Europe. And for the rule of law in the maritime areas, Europe has their proper interest in these areas to encourage all the country to respect the rule of law in the maritime areas. So that's why UK has sent their military assets to the regions, France too, and now Germany is trying to join us. And actually, EU by itself is trying to formulate its proper policy in the Indo-Pacific areas. And we have a consultation with the EU to have a common positions on various issues, including the rule of law in maritime areas. Of course, Indo-Pacific policy is really larger than the only issues of the maritime area, so it can include the global issues such as the climate change in the Indo-Pacific or any other issues. But I think like-minded countries could be working together. So my answer is, it's not a partnership, only EU and Japan on every issue. It can be open to every like-minded country if they decide to join us with the same ambitions and with being committed to the same group and based on the basic value, of course, such as democracy, freedom, and human rights.
Thank you very much for this clear answer. So I don't know if you professor you want to ask a question.
We started a little bit late, so 5 minutes late, so 7:05. So if we can use those 5 minutes and finish 8:05, if Ambassador, that would be okay
Yes,
with
course.
you. Yes, thank you. We have some more questions. One I would like to ask is, because that's directly related actually to the enhancing contacts between the younger generations, between the European students, Japanese students, and as you're giving this lecture to our Belgian students, one question is if there will be a cooperation between Japan and Europe for European university graduates, and for example, helping them to start a career in Japan. In other words, if you can reflect in any way what options or possibilities are for our European young graduates to maybe study or start a career in Japan, that would be really great for the audience to hear.
Sure. I welcome all the intentions of the participants and also your friends to be interested in Japan. We don't have such a kind of so enlarged system like inside Europe, but we are having many systems like the system of exchanging students. I think already your university has some with certain university in Japan, so you can very well make use of that. And of course, Japan is still far away from here, but actually COVID will not allow you. But I think from after summer, you'll be having occasion to visit our country. Why not studying in the Japanese universities? Now our universities are more and more open to foreigners. Of course, the language is different from yours, so maybe certainly from the daily life you have certain difficulties by studying in English or in French. I think we're still very open, and I advise all of you to at least to make stay in Japan, to see with your own eyes Japan. I explained to you our history, but it's totally different if you really stay there, and you'll be surprised to see that we have many common things. Why Europe and Japan has such a long history of exchanging our experience and so on? Because we have a separate history, but we have a long history. So our societies has a problem like yours, and other things the same. So I think your stay in Japan, your exchange with the Japanese young people will make more understand the common things between Europe and Japan, and also differences between Europe and Japan, also very important. So I encourage all of you to be interested in that. And if there are people who are interested in concretely going to Japan to study, I think our embassy here in Belgium is playing a role to provide you information. And of course, our delegation is ready to make an intermediate role for all of you.
And maybe one more question, perhaps we have time. Anthony, if you wish to choose one.
Yes, one last question. So, do you think that the European Union can become an help in the reform of the UN Security Council, like, for example, on the right of veto or on the number of permanent members?
Mm. It's a very difficult challenge. As you know, that Germany and Japan would like to make a reform of the Security Council, and also with other countries from Africa or Latin America or from Europe, like Italy. And it's true, historically, the United Nations is established after the war by the winning countries. As I explained to you, we were defeated countries. But is it really adapted to the actual era? No, everybody knows it. But you know that the five countries who has coincided with nuclear powers has monopolized the rights to decide on every issue. But that has not worked anymore. Look at the UN Security Council's activities. No important issue could be approved because there are Russia or China, United States, they couldn't make any consensus. One country make vetoes to resolve the important issues such as security and war. It should be changed. But for that, we need a consensus. You know, if we start to open this box of Pandora, why not representing African continent, they are populated, Latin Americans, or even Europe? What we will do with Italy? So all those questions have to be resolved. That is very clear to the eyes of Japanese to necessity of changing this UN system as soon as possible to be adapted to the needs of actual period. If not, UN could really lose its credibility. It's not a good thing for the multilateral system, which we have a benefit from that.
Okay, I think we will have to stop here with the questions. I just would like to make one short remark or reflection that I think we have had a fantastic discussion and very complementary to your presentation. We have explored in the discussion bilateral aspects of Japan-EU relations, multilateral, regional, global. We looked at the past, present, and also we discussed future opportunities and challenges in Japan-EU relations, relations between Japan and its neighbors and partners in Europe. So I think it was a very, very complementary, questions were very complementary to your presentation. So thank you very much, Ambassador Masaki, for this.
May I say a word before concluding? First, thank you very much for all your organization. I enjoyed very much all the questions because of a limit of time are really very serious one and very good questions. But I wonder whether maybe many of you are interested in more and more varied questions, including culture, cuisine, and so on. I couldn't answer that because of the limit of time. What I like to propose to you, we are now making activities of tweets and also the homepage via missions, and also I'm making my tweet. And sometimes I make known the various aspects of Japanese culture and people too. So please join us. And if you have any questions, please address ourselves. And this time, I think the time is limited. It's a very fast contact with you. But I hope that more people of your university or your friends will have more interest in looking at our country. Thank you very much once more, everybody, especially for Professor and all the organizers. You are doing a very good organization. Thank you very much.
Yeah. On my behalf as well, thanks a lot to Global Initiative for your fantastic initiative. Every single year, what you're doing is really great. And for your assistance and help, Anthony and Romain, for the organization of this event and for the opportunity, of course, to look closely at Japan-EU relations and for opportunity to bring our students from also the two different parts of Belgium together, from the French-speaking and from the Flemish, the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. That's also, I think, fantastic opportunity for us. Thank you.
どうもありがとう。さようなら、皆さん。